The dining room glowed with polished glass and linen, yet Clara's hands trembled as she balanced 3 steaming plates. Sweat slipped down her temple, dampening her collar. At table 4, Victor Langston tapped his watch against the marble edge, each strike louder than the last. His silver hair caught the light, his expression sharp with disdain. Clara flipped through her notepad. Lines of ink blurred the vital order gone. Her stomach hollowed. Then came Damon Cross, striding from the shadows, his smile tight as wire. His voice cut through the chatter, low, venomous. He loomed close rage, burning beneath his immaculate shirt. Without warning, his hand clamped Clara's throat, lifting her terror into silence. Forks stilled midair, glasses froze in trembling hands. Phones flickered in secret. And at the far end, among towers of dishes, Harlan Pierce stopped, scrubbing, eyes fixed unblinking, carrying the weight of judgment yet to come. The apartment smelled faintly of detergent and boiled rice. Clara pushed the door open, dropped her worn shoes by the mat, and forced a smile. At the kitchen table, her younger brother bent over textbooks, pen moving in hurried strokes. He looked up, eyes bright with questions too heavy for his age. "Did you pay the deposit yet?" His voice carried both hope and fear. Clara's heart squeezed, but she nodded, lying with the ease of someone who has lied only to protect. Dinner waited on the counter, instant noodles in chipped bowls, a handful of boiled greens for color. She sat across from him, her back aching from the shift, her smile thinner than the steam rising from the pot. When he returned to his notes, she pressed her hand to her throat skin, still tender where Damon's fingers had dug in. The silence thickened. She chewed without hunger, tasting only the weight of debts she could not escape. Across town, wealth reflected back in glass. Damon Cross stood in his apartment, a place of sharp lines and expensive quiet. In front of the mirror, he adjusted his tie, smoothing it with deliberate care, the gesture more ritual than necessity. His phone buzzed. He answered without hesitation, voice confident, almost smug. To the friend on the other end, he boasted of numbers rising, of whispers of promotion. "Fear," he said, swirling a glass of amber whiskey, "keeps people sharp. They hate me, but they work harder because of it." He sipped, savoring both the drink and the sound of his own philosophy. The mirror returned his grin, cold and polished. The amber liquid caught the light like captured fire, glowing against the gold of the lamp. For Damon, cruelty was currency, and tonight he counted himself rich. The room smelled of leather and liquor, its silence heavy with arrogance. At Romano's, the kitchen had long since cooled pans stacked in crooked towers. Harlan Pierce stood at the sink, sleeves rolled water running over plates already spotless. Jonas leaned against a counter, whispering to Marissa. "Why keep him around? Old man can barely keep up." Marissa laughed softly, shaking her head. Their words floated through the steam sharp with dismissal. Harlan did not answer. He nodded, once kept scrubbing his silence heavy as stone. Yet his eyes never rested, following the rhythm of the cooks, the clatter of spoons, the pace of deliveries. He noticed everything, recording it quietly behind the lines of his weathered face. A dish slipped. He caught it before it shattered, tugging off his glove for only a second. In that brief pause, the fluorescent light revealed hands not born for scalding water, nails, neat skin, 2 intact calluses lying in the wrong places. He pulled the glove back on shoulders, bending once more as though nothing had been revealed. The next evening, Clara hurried past the service station when a sharp clang split the air. A knife slipped from a tray, clattering to the tile. A young busboy froze, wide-eyed. Harlan bent without a word, lifting the blade carefully by its handle. He placed it back on the counter, steady as if he had carried knives his whole life. A few minutes later, Clara noticed him near the dessert station, slipping a leftover slice of cake into a small cardboard box. He pressed it gently into the busboy's hands, a quiet offering. No speech, no smile, only the faint nod of a man who asked for nothing in return. Clara watched from a distance, surprise softening the tension in her chest. This dishwasher, mocked by others, moved with a kindness that felt deliberate, almost secret. She etched the moment into her memory, a fragile reminder that not all strength came in raised voices. That night, Clara sat at the edge of her narrow bed, the air heavy with detergent and exhaustion. She pulled a small notebook from beneath her apron, its cover bent corners frayed. With trembling fingers, she began to write the time. Damon's hand closed around her throat, the silence of diners, the way her colleagues froze. She noted names, faces, fragments of words. The letters slanted, breaking mid-stroke as her hands shook ink, bleeding where her tears fell. Yet, line by line, the page filled with evidence, her determination rising against the ache in her throat. When the page was finished, she stared at it chest tight with fear that anyone might discover it. She slipped the notebook under her pillow as though hiding both weapon and wound in the same place. She lay back, eyes open in the dark, whispering to herself, "I have to endure. For him." The bar glowed in polished brass and deep mahogany, the hum of low laughter around Damon like background applause. He leaned against the counter cufflinks flashing under amber light. Across from him, a colleague nursed a drink listening. Damon lifted his glass ice, clinking his grin sharp with satisfaction. "They hate me," he said, voice almost gleeful. "That's why they obey. No one dares cross me. Not the girl, not the old man, not anyone." He smirked at the mention of Clara, dismissing her as an inconvenience already forgotten. "One more success," he added, "and the promotion is mine." The friend laughed weakly, but Damon only raised his glass higher, the whiskey's glow mirroring the glint in his eyes. To him, cruelty wasn't a flaw, it was leverage. In that room of luxury, he seemed untouchable, blind to the storm already gathering beyond his polished glass. The cold storage room hummed with the steady chill of machinery, its air sharp with the scent of raw herbs and boxed produce. Harlan stood at a steel counter ledger, open pen in hand. His eyes moved across columns of figures receipts tucked into folders, every detail inspected as though numbers carried secrets. He wrote quickly lines of small controlled script filling the page. Jonas wandered in, pulling a crate from the shelf, and caught the sight. His brow furrowed. "Why's the old man so obsessed? Just wash the dishes," he muttered under his breath. Harlan didn't reply. He closed the ledger, calm, almost dismissive. But in the moment their eyes met, Jonas faltered. Behind the mild expression, Harlan's gaze cut sharp glacial something far too precise for a dishwasher. The silence stretched heavy enough to unsettle. Jonas turned away, muttering again, though less certain. Harlan returned to his notes, each word a quiet step in a plan no one else could see. The dining room buzzed with chatter until Damon's voice snapped through it. A bowl of soup, returned half-finished, sat on the tray. He turned on Clara, smile gone, eyes narrow. "Cold," he announced loud enough for the table to hear. Clara stammered an apology, but he cut her short. "You lose 20% tonight." The words struck like a slap. The diners exchanged uneasy glances, the couple who had complained shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Clara bowed her head, swallowing hard, the protest caught in her throat. Jonas, standing nearby, lowered his gaze, unwilling to meet hers. Across the room, Harlan watched his hands still on a stack of plates. His expression gave nothing away, but his eyes darkened, storing the moment. Clara returned to her tables, moving as though carrying twice the weight. Every step reminded her that her work fed not only customers but her brother's future, and Damon had stolen a piece of it with a single sentence. Later that week, the crash of ceramic shattered the steady rhythm of service. A plate slipped from Jonas's hands, fragments scattering across the floor. The room hushed just for a beat before Damon's fury filled the space. "Useless," he spat, voice sharp as glass. His words landed harder than the shards on the tile. Jonas's face burned, red eyes stinging, but he bent quickly to clean fingers trembling as he gathered the pieces. The others froze, servers behind trays, cooks at the pass, each avoiding Damon's gaze, each pretending not to hear. Clara crouched near Jonas, her hand brushing his as she whispered, "It's nothing, don't listen." Her voice carried a fragile thread of comfort, but Jonas's shoulders remained hunched, shame pulling him down. Damon stood over them, arms folded, satisfied in the silence he commanded. Beyond the scene, Harlan's eyes followed the moment, taking in not just the humiliation, but the fear that rippled through every worker present. The request was small, almost whispered. Marissa approached Damon with her schedule sheet folded in half, voice careful. Her daughter's graduation was the next morning, a milestone she had waited years to see. She asked for the day shift just this once. Damon skimmed the paper, then scribbled with his pen, moving her name to the nightline without hesitation. His smirk curved as he slid it back. "Work comes first," he said flatly, like a sentence passed down. Marissa's lips pressed together, her eyes shimmering but dry. She nodded, swallowing whatever protest trembled on her tongue. Clara, standing nearby, saw it all. Her own hands tightened around the small notebook she carried, knuckles pale, the paper bending under her grip. Marissa walked away, head lowered, her back a portrait of quiet defeat. Damon's smile lingered as though he had proven a point. For him, family meant weakness. For them, it meant chains. That night, Clara sat at the small kitchen table, light dim above her, the notebook open. The pages had begun to thicken lines packed with hurried handwriting. She noted the date, the time Marissa's face as she accepted her punishment. Each word deepened the portrait of cruelty Damon painted daily. Her pen scratched hard against the paper letters, leaning forward as though straining under the same weight she carried. When her brother looked up from his homework, he frowned. "What's wrong?" he asked, innocent and concerned. She forced a smile, shook her head, and told him nothing. Once he turned back to his books, Clara wrote one last line at the bottom of the page. "I endure for Carlos." She closed the notebook with shaking fingers, sliding it under her pillow again. The fear of discovery pulsed in her chest, yet stronger was the resolve etched into every sentence she wrote. In the heat of the kitchen, Damon's eyes gleamed with calculation. He slipped past the prep counter, his hand brushing an order ticket. A critical ingredient was missing by design. Minutes later, the dish returned from the dining room, the guest's complaint echoing sharp through the hall. Damon turned immediately, voice raised, finger stabbing toward Clara. "Your mistake," he declared, confident and loud. Clara froze the ticket, burning in her hand. Proof absent, words caught in her throat. The customer left in frustration, muttering under his breath, leaving money untouched. Damon straightened, feigning disappointment, his expression one of rehearsed authority. Clara's chest tightened, the sting of humiliation searing deeper than the lost order. Around them, staff looked away, unwilling to confront the truth. Damon's glance met hers for a moment, his grin small but poisonous. The victory in his eyes was unmistakable. He had engineered her failure, and he relished every second. The apartment was hushed, only the hum of traffic seeping through thin walls. Clara sat curled on her bedphone, pressed tight against her ear. Her voice cracked as she whispered every humiliation, Damon's hand at her throat, the tips stolen in front of strangers, the deliberate trap that left her defenseless. On the other end, her roommate's silence was heavy, broken only by soft breaths of anger and pity. Clara's words stumbled into sobs, her body shaking as she tried to explain why she couldn't walk away. The tuition, she said, voice strangled. "If I leave now, Carlos loses everything." Her tears bled into the pillow, the fabric damp and cold against her cheek. For minutes, she said nothing, just listened to the emptiness of her friend's helpless comfort. At last, she whispered into the dark, almost to herself, "I have no way out." The sentence clung to the room like smoke, bitter and unyielding. In the stillness of the back corridor, the walls stained with grease and steam, Harlan slipped a phone from his pocket. His voice, low and gravelly, carried no hesitation. Tomorrow, he murmured, "Install the system. Full coverage." Each word was clipped a command more than a request. The line clicked once in response, then silence. He closed the phone, sliding it back into his apron. A moment later, he stood again at the sink sleeves, damp, resuming the rhythm of plates and water. No one entering the kitchen would have guessed what had passed in that quiet space. His back bent like any laborer's, his face hidden behind the veil of steam, but in the narrow lift of his jaw there was steel. The decision had been made. The machinery was already set in motion. What the others saw as routine was in truth the first turn of a blade hidden in plain sight. The office reeked of coffee and tension. Damon leaned across his desk, eyes narrowed, fingers drumming hard against the wood. "Who are you, really?" His words came fast, sharp. "Why the notes?" Why the watching Harlan stood just inside the door, posture, humble gaze lowered. "I only want to do my job well," he replied, voice even the tone of a man who had practiced humility until it felt like armor. Damon's lips curled a predator's grin. "If you're a spy, if you're here for anything else, I'll bury you. You'll never work in this city again." The air tightened heavy with threat. Harlan lifted his head only enough to meet Damon's glare, his eyes calm, unreadable. "I understand," he said softly. For a heartbeat, Damon was satisfied, mistaking silence for weakness. But as Harlan turned to leave, the faint glint in his eyes betrayed something colder, something that waited. The door to Damon's office creaked open, and Clara, carrying an empty tray, paused mid-step. Harlan emerged, his shoulders, lowered face, unreadable. For a fleeting instant, his eyes glinted sharp and alive before softening back into their familiar stillness. Clara's heart stuttered. She waited until he passed, then whispered, "Are you all right?" Her words clung nervously to the air. Harlan gave only a slow nod, refusing to linger, and walked back toward the sink with his usual quiet rhythm. Clara watched his back retreat into the shadows, her hand brushing the notebook hidden inside her apron pocket. The gesture was instinctive, as though the pen and paper could anchor her swirling thoughts. She had seen his silence before, but now it felt different, layered, calculated. For the first time, suspicion cut through her sympathy. Who was he really, this dishwasher who carried himself like someone with far heavier secrets? At dawn, the restaurant was still and hollow. A plain van rolled to the back entrance, disgorging a man with tool cases. Harlan guided him inside, eyes sharp on every detail. They worked quietly, the hum of drills muffled by early morning silence. Tiny lenses slid into the chandeliers, into the wall clocks, into corners disguised as shadows. Each placement was deliberate, a spider weaving threads across the room. By the time light broke across the windows, the restaurant itself had become a stage set under unseen eyes. Harlan powered up the tablet, the screen flickering with grainy but clear images, the dining hall, the kitchen, the office. He studied the feeds, each angle mapping the truth that had always slipped away. His jaw tightened. Everything will come to light. He muttered words more vow than observation. He shut the tablet, the secret now alive, patient waiting to witness. The diner smelled of fried bacon and coffee, a far cry from Romano's polish. Harlan sat in a corner booth, sleeves rolled, tablet propped against a cup. The feed spilled across the screen. Clara moving briskly through tables, Damon's gaze cutting like a knife each time she passed. The camera caught the smallest exchanges, an eye roll, a clipped insult, the way the staff stiffened when Damon approached. Harlan's hand gripped his coffee tighter with every frame, knuckles whitening, steam rising into his face. He typed notes beside the feed, each word pressed hard into the screen. The more he watched, the heavier his silence grew. This was no longer just information. It was proof, irrefutable damning. The flames in his eyes betrayed what the staff could not see, rage sharpened into resolve. Damon had carved fear into every corner of the restaurant. Now Harlan held the blade to carve it out. Her fingers hovered above the phone for minutes before she typed the words, "We need to talk." When she pressed, send, her chest tightened, half expecting silence. Instead, somewhere across the kitchen, Harlan's pocket buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and the corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something close. Hours later, when the restaurant emptied and the night air cooled, Clara stood behind the back door, notebook pressed to her chest, pulse racing. The shadows of the alley stretched long, every sound sharpening her nerves. She imagined Damon discovering her, the notebook torn from her hands. Then footsteps approached, slow, steady. Harlan stepped into view, his face composed, unreadable. He nodded once, as though this meeting had been inevitable, as though he had been waiting all along. Clara exhaled, realizing she had crossed a line she could never step back from. The truth, whatever it was, would unfold here. The small book felt heavier than ever when Clara extended it toward him. Harlan opened it carefully, scanning the pages filled with her cramped handwriting, dates, times, words Damon had flung like knives. He nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing with thought. Detailed, he said at last, but not enough. Clara bristled, her fear pushing against his calm. Then, who are you? Why are you watching him? Her question hung fragile, yet sharp. Harlan closed the notebook, tucking it under his arm without answering. A faint smile touched his lips, one that revealed nothing, one that deepened the shadows around him. Clara's unease thickened. She had offered him her only weapon, yet she knew nothing about the man now holding it. Doubt coiled in her stomach. Was he protector, or something else entirely? Silence stretched between them, heavy, unresolved. The mystery of Harlan Pierce had only grown darker. Inside his office, Damon adjusted his tie as faces flickered across the laptop screen. Regional managers, corporate overseers, each listening as he spoke with confidence polished to steel. Charts glowed on his slides, revenue-rising satisfaction percentages dressed up in green. "I lead with a firm hand," he declared, leaning close to the camera. "Discipline breeds results. Fear sharpens focus. My team knows better than to fall short." A few faces nodded, impressed. One even murmured approval. Damon's smile widened, arrogance radiating from the screen. He believed his cruelty had been transformed into strategy. What he did not know was that a faint buzz in Harlan's ear carried every word to another listener. In the kitchen, disguised as a dishwasher, Harlan froze mid-scrub. His eyes darkened, jaw set. Damon wasn't just abusing his staff, he was teaching others to follow his path. The thought burned in Harlan like acid. This rot ran deeper than one man. The alley was damp, the faint hum of the city echoing against brick walls. Clara, weighted notebook clutched close to her chest. When Harlan appeared, she exhaled a shudder. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered, voice breaking. "I want to quit, but I can't. If I leave, my brother loses his future. The tears came fast, raw, her shoulders trembling. Harlan stood still, letting her words pour into the night. When she faltered, he answered, voice steady firm. "Don't leave. The truth needs a witness." Clara shook her head. Grief and exhaustion carved deep into her face. "He's all I have," she sobbed. "And I'm all he has." Harlan's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, the gesture more anchor than comfort. "Family is not a weakness," he said, eyes steady on hers. "It is your strength." Something in her heart steadied, if only for a moment. For the first time, she felt less alone. By week's end, the air inside Romano's had shifted. Staff avoided Damon's gaze, whispers curling between stations like smoke. He felt it instantly. Slamming a hand against the counter, he snarled, "Who's talking about me?" Silence answered heavier than words. His suspicion sharpened, circling back again and again to the dishwasher. Harlan's quiet presence, his watchful eyes, the way he lingered just long enough to unsettle it, gnawed at him. Damon began watching closely, shadowing Harlan's movements, the sinks, the storage rooms, the side corridors. Yet every time he looked, he found nothing, only the bent shoulders of a man scrubbing dishes, water dripping from tired hands. The lack of evidence fanned his paranoia. At night, he stared into his mirror, his reflection distorted by anger, jaw clenched until it ached. The more he searched, the less he found, and the emptiness drove him mad. His suspicion turned inward, twisting his face into something ugly. The crack of a plate on tile drew every eye. Jonas stammered apologies, cheeks flushed, but Damon's fury was instant. His words lashed out sharp and public. Pathetic. Worthless. Jonas wilted under the assault. This time, Clara's voice broke the silence. "Stop," she said, her tone trembling but clear. Damon froze, stunned, then let out a cold laugh. "You want to be a hero?" The word dripped with mockery. Clara dropped her gaze, but her eyes, burning, betrayed defiance. The room felt the shift, an unspoken crack in the fear that bound them. Damon's smile died. Rage coiled in his chest, silent promise that he would destroy her completely. Hidden from view, a camera caught every flicker of his face, every tremor in Clara's clenched fists. And somewhere far away, Harlan watched from a screen, his expression carved in steel. Clara had crossed her line of fear. Damon had marked her as his target. The office was quiet, the only sound the steady hum of machines rendering video into proof. Harlan leaned over the table phone, pressed close, his voice gravel dark. "Pull everything he ordered, every clip, every word." Within hours, a thick report landed in his hands. Damon's insults, his threats, his hand gripping Clara's throat, all time-stamped, undeniable. Harlan flipped page after page, the evidence heavy as stone. At last, he closed the file with a sharp breath. "Enough," he muttered the word, "final." He reached for his locker, tugging free the worn apron, folding it with deliberate calm. From the bottom of a locked case, he drew a charcoal suit, pressed and waiting. As he fastened the jacket, the illusion of frailty peeled away. The bent back straightened, the eyes sharpened. The man who had washed dishes with silent patience now looked into the mirror and saw not a worker but a master reclaiming his throne. The dining hall had been cleared, chairs pulled close around Damon as he stood before his staff. His voice carried with the swagger of a conqueror. Charts of numbers sprawled across the screen, profits rising, customer ratings glowing. "This," he declared, striking the figures with his hand, "is my doing. Disciplined structure and zero tolerance for weakness." He turned his gaze one by one to his targets. "Clara, Jonas, Marissa. Each of you drag us down with mistakes and excuses." Their faces lowered shame, forced upon them, silence their only shield. The others stared at the floor, too afraid to move. Damon's grin widened, feeding on their submission. "Do you see? Fear works. Respect is earned by strength." He mistook their silence for admiration, their bowed heads for loyalty. The room stank of defeat, and Damon drank it like triumph. In his mind, he had already won blind to the trap closing around him. The back door swung open, a sound that sliced through Damon's speech. Every head turned. Harlan entered, not in his stained apron, but in a tailored suit that gleamed under the lights. His stride was calm, deliberate, every step unraveling the disguise. The staff gasped, shock tightening the air. Clara's lips parted, eyes wide, her notebook slipping from her hands. Damon froze mid-sentence, his smirk faltering. You're just the dishwasher," he stammered, voice cracking. Harlan stopped in the center of the room, gaze fixed on him with cold precision. "No," he said, voice ringing with quiet authority. "I am the owner of this place." The words landed like thunder. Silence followed thick and electric as if the walls themselves held their breath. Every secret Harlan had buried now stood revealed, and the balance of power shifted in an instant. Damon's kingdom of fear had just begun to crumble. Harlan raised a remote, and the projector screen flickered alive. The first clip appeared Damon's hand around Clara's throat, her eyes wide with terror, the restaurant frozen in horrified silence. Gasps rippled through the room. Damon's skin drained of color, his mouth opening but no words forming. The footage cut again. Damon stripping Clara of her tips, her head bowed as humiliation burned. Another clip followed Jonas shrinking under Damon's roar, the insult useless ringing out as shards of porcelain scattered across the floor. The final blow was Marissa's quiet face as Damon denied her daughter's graduation, his smirk lit by cruel satisfaction. Around the room, tears welled, fists clenched. Clara's breath came ragged, Jonas shook his head, Marissa covered her mouth. Even the cooks, hardened by years of chaos, could not hide their grief. Truth glowed across the wall, undeniable, each image a scar now laid bare for all to see. No, Damon's voice cracked desperate. He lurched forward, pointing at the screen. That's twisted, edited lies. His words rang hollow against the evidence still playing behind him. Harlan's reply was calm, almost surgical. 18 incidents in 2 weeks. Documented, witnessed, recorded. Damon's knees buckled and he slumped into a chair, sweat streaking his temples. He glanced around the room, searching for an ally. None met his eyes. Where once he ruled through fear, now only contempt stared back. Jonas's glare was unflinching. Marissa's silence cut like a blade. Clara's expression burned with defiance. Damon tried to summon rage, but it faltered, turning into a broken shout that echoed without power. His empire had crumbled in a single hour. What remained was a man, stripped bare, small, and cornered, gasping in a room that no longer bent to him. His downfall was not sudden, it was earned piece by piece and complete. The silence broke with Harlan's voice steady and final. Damon Cross, you're fired. The words fell like a gavel. At once, 2 suited men stepped through the doorway, their presence filling the space with authority Damon could not challenge. He jerked upright, thrashing his protest, a tangle of curses and denial. You can't do this. I made this place what it is. Harlan's gaze never wavered. You no longer have a place here. Cold, absolute. The guards seized Damon by the arms. He fought, twisting, but the struggle only revealed his frailty. The staff watched as he was dragged toward the door, his shouts fading into incoherence. No one moved to help. Some even exhaled relief, breaking in quiet waves. As his figure vanished beyond the threshold, a weight lifted from the room. The reign of fear was over, carried out screaming, never to return. In its place, silence bloomed like light. The hallway rang with Damon's voice, cracked and furious. You'll pay for this. I'll sue you. I'll destroy you. His words spilled like venom, but no longer held weight. A calm figure stepped forward, a woman in a dark suit carrying a folder thick with papers. She opened it, her tone brisk, final. Sign this, or every frame of your abuse will be delivered to every employer in the state. Your choice. Damon's bluster crumbled. His hand shook as he scanned the pages, but the truth was already written across his pale face. With trembling fingers he scrawled his name, the pen, scratching like surrender. The paper was folded, collected, and sealed away. Damon's shoulders sagged, his eyes hollow. Without another word he staggered down the corridor, his footsteps dragging his frame diminished to nothing. Harlan watched from the doorway, silent, unmoved. The tyrant had been undone not by fury, but by fact. The restaurant floor was hushed until Jonas suddenly collapsed into his hands, sobs tearing through him. Months of fear unspooled all at once. Marissa pressed her palms to her face, tears slipping freely as she whispered, "We're free. Finally free." Others nodded relief, shuddering through their shoulders, breaths coming uneven as if they had been holding them for months. Clara stood apart, her eyes wide, heart racing with disbelief. Around her the walls felt lighter, the air no longer thick with dread. Harlan stood among them, his presence solid, his nod steady. He spoke no words, but his silence carried weight, a quiet acknowledgment of what they had endured. The room, once heavy with despair, now swelled with release. For the first time in months, the staff allowed themselves to feel hope. Fear had loosened its grip, and in its absence, raw humanity spilled out in tears. When the sobs had softened, Harlan stepped forward, his gaze sweeping across the weary faces. His voice broke the quiet. I let this go on too long. Then he bowed his head. The staff froze. An owner, a man of power, lowering himself before them, it was unthinkable. Clara's throat tightened, her words trembling. You saved us, she said, eyes glistening. Without you, we'd still be trapped. Harlan raised his head slowly, the lines of his face carved with regret. I saved you too late, he replied. It was my duty to protect you from the start. That's what leadership should mean. His admission silenced the room, humbling in its honesty. The anger they had carried shifted into something softer trust. In his eyes, they saw not just authority but a man willing to bear responsibility. For Clara, for Jonas, for Marissa, his words did more than free them. They restored faith. The room was still humming with relief when Harlan turned toward Clara. His voice cut through the air, calm yet weighty. When no one else dared, you wrote everything down. You gave the truth a voice. He paused, letting the silence honor her courage. I want you to step into management training. Clara's breath caught her fingers tightening around her worn apron. Me, I'm just a server. The disbelief cracked her voice. Harlan's expression softened, but his words carried force. That's exactly why. You know what it means to endure. You know what fairness should feel like. For a moment, Clara stood frozen, the weight of his trust pressing down. Then, as if on cue, hands around the room rose in applause, Jonas clapping hard through tears, Marissa smiling despite the streaks on her face. Clara's eyes shone, her heart trembling between fear and pride. For the first time, she felt seen. Later that night, Clara stepped into the quiet corridor, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice shook as she spoke. Carlos, the tuition will be covered. You don't have to worry anymore. Silence answered her, first heavy with disbelief. Then came the sound of muffled sobs on the other end. Really, you mean it? He asked, his words breaking with emotion. Clara leaned against the wall, tears slipping down her cheeks as she whispered back, Yes. You'll go to college. You'll become the man you dreamed to be. A laugh broke through her, crying soft and fragile as if joy itself felt unfamiliar. In the distance, Harlan lingered unseen, watching her with quiet gravity. The victory was hers, but the pride in his eyes betrayed his part in it. For Clara, the burden of despair lifted at last, replaced with the fragile yet fierce hope of a better tomorrow. The staff gathered once more, but this time no fear shadowed the room. Harlan stood before them, his presence no longer hidden. His words were firm-edged with promise. From today, this place will uphold zero tolerance for abuse. No shouting, no threats, no intimidation. Ever again. Murmurs spread, hopeful disbelieving. He went on, We will create scholarships for our employees and their families. Education should not be sacrificed for survival. Hours will be fair. Benefits guaranteed. Respect mandatory. The room erupted in relief. Hands clasped shoulders, touching, cautious smiles unfurling into something brighter. Clara stood among them, her eyes glistening as she watched the wave of hope move through her colleagues. For the first time, the restaurant felt alive, not with fear, but with possibility. Harlan nodded, not as a ruler, but as a man who had chosen to rebuild. A new chapter had begun, written with trust instead of fear. The restaurant pulsed with life, every table filled, laughter rising above the clink of glasses. Warmth threaded through the air, not from the chandeliers, but from the ease of those who worked here. Clara, now in her manager's jacket, moved with quiet authority, guiding staff with gestures that carried both firmness and care. Jonas laughed as he passed plates. Marissa's smile glowed as she greeted a family at the door. The guests leaned back in their chairs, content, the kind of peace that once seemed impossible. On the wall, near the host stand, hung a chart of growth revenues, climbing, steady proof etched in numbers of what dignity had built. Where fear once ruled, pride now thrived. Romano's had been remade not by Damon's steel grip, but by hands that lifted rather than crushed. The change was visible in every face, every corner alive, hopeful and unshaken. At the farthest table, half hidden from view, Harlan sat alone, a glass of red wine cradled in his hand. His eyes followed Clara as she guided her team, sharp gestures softened by the respect she commanded. A flicker of memory shadowed his gaze. The choking silence of that first night, the trembling hands of a young waitress, the cries of staff breaking under cruelty. For a heartbeat, the echoes returned heavy and cold. His fingers tightened around the stem of the glass before he let it ease. Across the room, Clara smiled, her voice carrying steady authority. The sight eased him. His lips curved in the faintest smile, the kind that carried both pride and sorrow. He had seen the worst, and now he witnessed the best. The restaurant lived again, and so did the people inside it. For Harlan, that was victory enough. Harlan stepped into the quiet night, the glow of Romano's sign burning above him. The street was empty, the air sharp, each footstep carrying weight. He paused, eyes fixed on the light that promised safety inside, but his expression remained stern. This victory was only one. Across the city, behind polished doors and polished smiles, others still ruled by fear. He knew it, felt it. The fight wasn't finished. With steady resolve, he walked on his shadow stretching long across the pavement. One restaurant saved many more waiting. The work of stripping masks had only just begun.